parse that file. And when does it parse the file? It parses the file when I load the module. So I can connect to the CLI, and at runtime, when Asterisk starts up, it'll load in all its modules and read in all its configuration. But I can force a reload of the module, in this case by just doing a module reload chan sip, right? And I reloaded sip, that read in the message configuration. A shortcut for that is simply sip reload. So I can do sip reload, and it has the same effect. That's like a shortcut to reloading the module. We have a question.
Does that drop call the process?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So if I reload the sip module, do I drop calls? And the answer is no. Unless, what do you think about that? Unless you're like restarting Dotty. When they're analog, or when they're Dotty, which is interfacing with hardware, you can't update configuration without doing some time to schedule to drop those calls. I think depending on, I'd have to ask our Dotty guys if they've updated that. But has that been anyone's experience where they've updated Dotty configuration without dropping calls? It does drop calls, yeah. So that's still the case. If it's in Dotty, because Dotty is interfacing with actual hardware with telephony cards, it's a different mechanism. So when you update your Dotty configuration, you need to schedule downtime. With SIP, however, you can, so I mean, we could test it out. We'll see. Nothing like a live demo, right? Actually, let's do it this way. 601. Dial it out. So here is my call, and it's up, and I can do core show channels. There's my calls, and I can do a SIP reload. And hey, my calls are still going, so I show my channels, no problem at all. So you reload the module, you're not dropping that call, right? So that's a really nice thing. The other thing that I will mention at this point is that oftentimes I see a lot of Asterisk administrators, and they'll just do this. They'll just say reload. That reloads everything. Now, on the one hand, that's nice, because it doesn't matter. Am I working in SIP? Am I working in extensions.conf? Am I doing something else? Whatever it is, I don't have to remember the thing that I'm doing. I just say reload. But what's the bad part of that? Yeah, it does. Well, it reloads everything, and you're not going to see your explicit notices and warnings from that specific configuration, right? So, if I look at sip.conf, and let's just see if I can hork it up. I messed up a setting there, and let's see if I do sip reload, what does it give me? Ah, you have an error, right? There's a problem. Will it give it to me again? Nope. Maybe I even torqued it. Let me use sip.conf. So I purposely broke it. Let's do sip reload. Previous sip reload not done. It's like, oh man, you really messed me up, right? Core restart now. Well, tell you to freeze on me. Okay, sip reload. Whoa! What have we done? Okay. That is, it's, whoop. Something is dying on that shell. So, service asterisk restart. Okay. Let's see. Sip.conf. Type equals thread. All right. Okay. Let's see. Sip reload. What? Sip. Yeah, I guess it may take some time to load in, but because sometimes. Yeah. Okay. Sip. Yeah. Why? What's that? Kill? Yeah. You guys I know why this is torquing up on me. It is because I'm running the VM on my laptop. When you close your laptop lid, it goes to sleep and it kills your state. And so what's happening now is my Unix system time is off from what's actual reality. It's causing all of this behavior. And so I apologize because I've probably seen this a bajillion. How many of you guys run VMs on your laptop and that's happened to you where you like close the laptop? And so in any case, I surmise. That's my surmisance. So let's just try this out and hope that my state is maintained. Did I do anything? We'll shut it down for now. I'll come back to it later. So we'll see if my VM will pop up in a moment. In any case, what we're discussing. So the concept there, which I so eloquently described to you, is the notion that what's that? Rebooting, I know, yeah, it's nice, the Windows style configuration. Well, and actually this is a good point. So if you're a good Linux sysadmin, you like to go granular, you try to avoid the reboot as much as possible. So you can kind of see the troubleshooting steps, right? You get a live show of me under pressure troubleshooting my system, this is the process you really do want to follow, which is it's granular. So, hey, I have a SIP issue. I want to try just reloading SIP. Oh, the SIP reload doesn't work. Let me just try to force reload that module or see what's going on, because I just want to deal with that module because I don't want to mess up the rest of my system if it's not messed up. In this case, my entire VM was in a misconfigured state, and that was kind of the issue I was facing. But in any case, that's just a best practice. You don't want to just go to restart all the time. You don't want to reload everything because you want to get the granular messages from SIP, which I was trying to show before I killed it. So you would want to do a SIP reload and just show those SIP messages first. That was the kind of idea there. And then finally, to show basically the idea that Asterisk does not parse the file on the fly, right? So the idea here is you changed your text file, and then it has to read in that configuration. So I changed sip.conf. I then need to reload the SIP module in order to reread in that configuration. That's the kind of notion there, that it doesn't parse on the fly. So next up, as someone mentioned earlier, I need to have an extension to dial my phone. So here I create extension 6001. I'm going to use the dial application. And the syntax that I will pass to my dial application, the arguments, are going to be technology/resource. The technology, it could be SIP, it could be EEX, it could be Chandati, right? The resource is going to be, for example, like a SIP account, which it needs to be a peer or a friend in order to do outbound dialing. Or it could be like a DOTI channel. You could dial DOTI, it could be DOTI/1 or DOTI group 1 for like a PRI group or a call group. That's the technology/resource. And then comma, and this is a timeout. So it's going to ring for about 20 seconds. So that's maybe 4 or 5 rings, if you want to think about it in that way. That's kind of like a timeout. So I've created a SIP account in Asterisk, created a SIP account, a number to dial it, and I need to get an account on the phone. So there's several ways to get the accounts on the phone. Let's just assume for now I've gotten my account on the phone. And so this will help us see the whole call flow of kind of what happens here, okay? So let's say David's phone here dials 200. Now keep in mind the abstraction from reality, right? So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say David dials 200, and that comes into Asterisk over SIP. And so Asterisk looks in sip.conf and says, do I have an account for David, right? Well, it doesn't really look in sip.conf, right? It does not parse sip.conf on the fly. Instead, what it looks in is it looks at its cache of sip.conf the last time the module was reloaded, if that makes sense. So it says, hey, do I have an account for David? I do have an account for David. And so what is the context? Where should I start in the dial plan? I will start in a context called inside. Then it goes over to the dial plan cache. And it says, oh, hey, here's an inside context. Let me start searching down the context until I find 200, which was the number that David sent in. So, oh, lo and behold, I do have an extension named 200. What does that extension do? Well, it dials a SIP peer named Kenny. So going back over, looking in the SIP cache, do we have a device for Kenny? Yes, we do. And he's type equals friend. So it is a friend is a peer and a user. And then what is the host name for that device? And it could be dynamic. It could be registered. For the sake of simplicity, I have an explicit IP here. And so then it dials out that IP. So that's kind of like the full call flow, all of the parts working together. The call comes in. What's the SIP account? What context is configured for that account? OK, let me go start in that context. Do I have that extension? OK, if I match it, great. If I don't, then I'll tell it I don't have that number, right? Or if it's not in that context, it could be an included context or something like that, right? So last step in the mix, and this is interesting, the state maintained on my phones, despite a reboot of the VM, which is kind of interesting. So let me try this out. Go up. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually get an account on the phone. So I said, hey, assuming we have an account on the phone, but how do we get an account on the phone? So there are 3 predominant mechanisms for getting an account on the phone. So the one is just manual configuration. So I could go to the screen and hit settings and scroll through the phone and try to type in the actual account credentials that way. Has anyone ever done that? A few folks. I'm so sorry that you guys experienced that. Can I ask what the use case was, why you guys needed to do that? OK, so in the early days when they didn't have a web interface, that's what you had. OK, old school phones. So these days, every phone has a web server on the phone, and it has a GUI. And so you can actually hit the IP address of the phone and get to a GUI and manually configure the phone. And that works pretty nice if you have a few phones. You can just manually get them up and going. But it doesn't work nice if you really have like more than 3. You know, if you want to do any type of mass deployment, or if you're deploying thousands of phones, you really want some type of automated configuration mechanism. You don't want to have to log into every single 1,000 phones and configure them all manually. So in order to do distributed configuration, the common known adopted way of provisioning phones is to use a DHCP option 66. So in your DHCP server, you give it a boot protocol, and you give it an option 66, and you basically tell it the configuration server, right? So you can do this in Windows DHCP, you can do this in Linux DHCPD, whatever your DHCP server is. When the server gives the phone its IP address, it also then tells it, oh, and hey, by the way, here's where to go to get your configuration. And it could go and get its configuration using some type of protocol. So it could use FTP or SFTP or HTTP or HTTPS. Or back in the day, what was really popular was to use TFTP, although that's not secure at all. So these days, I really recommend more HTTPS. And actually, Digium phones won't even do TFTP. They'll do FTP, FTPS, HTTP, HTTPS. But in any case, they'll go, let's say it's HTTPS. They'll go to the web server, and they'll download their configuration, right? Digium phones work just fine that way. You can use option 66, and then that configuration is typically a series of XML files. And this is not too bad if you have something like an endpoint manager that will write those XML files for you. That's all fine and dandy. Or in some cases, you have to manufacture or write something that's going to manufacture these XML files. And they can be different for different phones. If you have like different phones in your install, there's a lot of hassle to that. So when Digium went to create their phones, we said, there's got to be a better way. And so we came up with the Digium Phone Module for Asterisk. The Digium Phone Module for Asterisk is a way to auto-configure the phones with no fuss to get it up and going. So the Digium Phone Modules for Asterisk, the way that works is the phones themselves actually speak MDNS. and that's multicast DNS. So when the phone boots up, it sends out a multicast message to everybody on its subnet, right? And it says, hey, here I am. So it doesn't even need a DHCP configuration option. Just as soon as it boots up, it says, hey, here I am. The server, likewise, Asterisk, with the DPMA, which is the Digium Phone Module for Asterisk, DPMA boots up and it says, oh, by the way, hey, here I am, right? So without any configuration at all, the phone and the server already know who each other are, and they're already talking to each other, and they already know each other's IP address, right? So then with the Digium Phone Module for Asterisk, what you can do is there's some configuration in resdigiumphone.conf, and you can configure in a normal text-based file. So you don't need to mess with XML. You don't need to have some type of parser, configurator, or generator to generate that XML. You can configure a regular text file like everything else in Asterisk, or you can bump it down to real-time with key-value pairs like everything else in Asterisk. This is what the file looks like. So the idea here is I've got a couple different sections, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But the thing I want to point out is that I create a section here called a line section. And so for example, on this phone, I can have 6 lines. And I can have up to 6 different SIP accounts, right? So when I say type equals line, I really don't have to put then a lot of information in here. Note what's absent. There's no type equals friend. There's no host equals dynamic. There's no password credentials. Where does the phone get its password credentials? It gets them auto-magically from sip.conf, right? So you've already set up sip.conf with all of your SIP stuff. In resdigiumphone.conf, you basically tell it, hey, go get the data for this SIP account and apply it to this phone. And resdigiumphone.conf will just do that for you. So this is a nice way, especially if you're doing like SMB-style configuration. The phone will boot up. It automatically sees a server. It'll push to a list a number of accounts. Or just like a DHCP, you can match on MAC address. And so I'll show you guys my stuff if it will come up. Let's find out. And we have a question in the back here. What happens if it's not on the same subnet? So if it's not on the same subnet, what you can do is then you can still use DHCP, because obviously you're not going to get multicast outside of your network, right? So if it's, you can use DPMA when it's not on the same subnet, so you could use it across VLANs or across networks. And so what you do is you send it a DHCP option that basically says, hey, here's your DHCP server, or here's your resdigiumphone.conf server, here's your DPMA server. And the difference is with DPMA, you can do text-based configuration instead of having to do XML-based configuration. And with DPMA, you kind of get some bonuses. So just to talk about the phones for a second, the concept here with the Digium phone is for a long time, Digium actually didn't have phones. Some of you guys have been kind of in the mix for a long time. And people kept on asking us, oh, we need an Asterisk phone, we need an Asterisk phone, we need an Asterisk phone. And even though there was many phone vendors on the market and people were attaching phones to Asterisk, nobody designed a phone for Asterisk. And so Digium came along and said, we will design a phone specifically for Asterisk. And so, for example, I already talked about some of the features that just come with Asterisk, right? So in Asterisk, you just get a nice queuing application. That queuing application automatically works with Digium phones. It just works. We designed it for it. You get a voicemail application. Digium phones work with Asterisk voicemail. You get a contacts application. There's all of this kind of stuff where the phones tightly integrate with Asterisk. And so if you're using DPMA, you basically get like you've configured voicemail, and like visual voicemail on Digium phones just works. So even if you're on a disparate network, even if you're using DHCP to say, hey, go and get your DPMA configuration over here, it's still a value to use DPMA because then you can get those apps. Yeah, another question. What's that? Let's take a look at the file here. So if I go to Etsy Asterisk, and look at resdigiumphone.conf. So here's a resdigiumphone.conf, and you can see there's a couple options here. So there's a user list auth, and there's a config auth. So you can authenticate, hey, does the phone pop up a list of user accounts to choose from? know what type of authentication you want. You can just set this to be a MAC address like that. So it'll set it for MAC configuration. I currently have it configured for basically I've disabled all authentication. When the phone boots up, it just says, hey, here's all the accounts I have. And that's nice for my configuration, but you probably wouldn't want to do that. You probably want to config based on MAC address, right? And then you can tell it some MDNS ports, and I'm calling this my Chia DPMA VM. There are options here to specify time zone, and then here's a network option, right? So with a network option, you can specify multiple networks for the phone to exist on and behave. And if the phone comes up on network A, then use this registration server. If the phone comes up on network B, use this registration in this firmware server. Those types of settings. You can do firmware settings. So here are firmware options. So these are, again, kind of what we would call a configuration object. So the firmware settings is really nice because this is firmware 1.3. But if I want to update to firmware 1.4, which we just released Wednesday, actually today, I think the blog post went out. Let's actually, let's just take a quick peek to blogs.digium.com. Not up yet, probably will go out soon. So although you can look at this nice blog and put that out on Twitter. But in any case, we just released this new 1.4 firmware. And so if I wanted to do the 1.4 firmware, I can have both options available. So I can granularly select this batch of phones, roll the new firmware, so I don't have to roll it to every phone at once, right? You have that kind of nice option. You can set ringtones, a bunch of other stuff. Here I've created a phone. This one's called Alan D70, which is Alan's D70 phone. And if Alan wants to use his account, I can put Alan's account on a D40 if I want. I can put it on a D50. I've set the firmwares there, given his name and his line. And that's about it. And the line ties over to here. This is A Dorner. And this matches sip.conf, right? So on the top half of the screen here, I've got sip.conf, and there's the A Dorner. And on the bottom half of the screen, here I've got the line equals A Dorner. So this here is pointing to this up here, right? So the Digium phone points to the SIP. Let's close that. Let's close that down. There's some options there. What you can look in is, so you can look in the sample file. You can look at resdigiumphone.conf, and you can look at the wiki, which is because we still had this outstanding question of, hey, what is the option to remotely enable? And so if you go to the wiki.asterisk.org, and you go to Digium Asterisk products, you go to Digium phones, and you go here to provisioning, and you've got XML information, custom phone apps, and somewhere in here is the option that will tell you, might be in the FAQ. I'd have to look it up, but it's the configuration for it's on the wiki. So I can't recall off the top of my head, but it is documented, and it just would take me a moment to find it. I can find it during the break. We had another question.
So I understand that your phones can communicate with the server using the X as well.
No. So the question was, can the phones talk to Asterisk over EEX? And the answer is no. The phones are actually SIP phones. And so if you remember, EEX stands for Inter-Asterisk Exchange. And so the purpose of EEX is to link an Asterisk server to another Asterisk server. So it's a server-to-server trunking protocol. It is not designed for endpoints. So although there are some EEX endpoints, for example, Zoip or Softphone will talk EEX, it's not really a protocol that's designed for endpoints. It's really designed for trunking. So the phones are actually speak standard SIP. So in this case, I've configured my resdigiumphone.conf, and I think that if you guys want to see how it all works, you can kind of stop by the booth, and I can show you reconfiguration. Or if you want to come up here and play with the phones, I can basically show you when the phones boot up, they find the server and they pull their configuration. And from a user point of view, you put a phone on the desk, it boots up, it knows who it is. It behaves exactly the same as option 66. The difference is it took you as a system administrator or as the Asterisk integrator, it took you about 25% of the time to build all that than it would to build out all the other stuff. Therein is the kind of difference. So, from a behavior point of view, it's real similar, but it lets you kind of do that automatically. So that is the review. You basically configure account for Asterisk, configure account for the phone, get an extension to dial phone, and we're up and going. So any other questions on endpoint configuration? Let's jump back to the dial plan. All right. Let's take a look at this. So this has us going until 3 o'clock. So we've got about 15 minutes to hit this. We'll see how far we go. If we kind of get to around 3 o'clock, we might just kind of stop in the middle and come back. So we'll see kind of how it goes. So call this session interactive dial plan. So we've kind of already configured some dial plan. That is, we've done some things. We've dialed a phone. We've seen a little bit of just sample dial plan. But I want to interact with my dial plan. I want to do some things. So we're going to look at some more advanced dial plan applications. We will actually make a voice menu. So we'll actually configure an auto attendant IVR in Asterisk. And we will implement voicemail for the endpoints that we just configured, right? So IVR Basics. Now, if you are coming from the old school kind of like telephony world, so people come to Asterisk from different disciplines. So some people come from the networking world. Some people come from they're developers, they're software developers predominantly. Some people come from like the server, sysadmin kind of a world. And then some people come from the telephony world. And then some people come from the Linux world. So you kind of have like these 5 different disciplines of Asterisk. And people come from different backgrounds. In any case, if you kind of have been in the telephony world for a long time, you probably remember that once upon a time, an auto attendant and an IVR were 2 very different things. And the thing that separated an auto attendant from an IVR was $10,000. Basically, the auto attendant was a very simple device. It was like press 1 for sales, press 2 for support. We're all familiar with auto attendants. And that would just route calls to a different destination. An IVR, on the other hand, this was historically an IVR was something that would get like a result from a database and have some other type of interactivity that was more customized and expensive. In Asterisk, they're effectively the same thing. The way you configure an auto attendant, you can do all types of IVR functionality with the same type of dial plan code. So in the VoIP world, where Asterisk is prevalent, a lot of times people just interchange auto attendant and IVR. They're interchangeable words. When somebody says IVR, they can mean press 1 for sales, press 2 for support, and an IVR is an auto attendant is an IVR. It's all kind of the same. So let's actually take a look at an IVR menu. So here is an example of a slide that basically has built an auto attendant in dial plan. So there's a little bit going on here, so I'll break it down step by step. The first thing to notice is that an IVR basically is a dial plan context. Or it could be a series of contexts, but at its most basic, it's just a dial plan context. So if you remember, I talked about having, for example, extensions to dial come in and route somewhere in one context, and maybe extensions that do outbound dialing, put those in another context. Well, here I've got my IVR in a context. So I say, go to the IVR context, or in this case, go to the AA menu, the auto attendant menu context. And inside that context, I'm going to do some auto attendant-like behavior. The next thing to note is that I'm using the S extension here. Now, this is a bit of a historical convention, but it's still a valid one nonetheless. The S extension is what we would call a special extension in Asterisk. So does anybody know what we would call a special extension? How would you describe a special extension? OK. Yeah, the answer was it routes to an application. And that's probably pretty good because it routes under certain conditions, right? So the special extensions are going to route under certain conditions. So for example, S stands for the start extension. And the call will automatically route to S when there is no DID information for the channel. Okay? So effectively what happens is if you drop a call into a context and it doesn't have any number to route on, so normally you drop a call into a context and you say, I want extension 100 or I want extension Bob, right? Well, what happens if you drop a call into a context and the call is just there, it doesn't have any DID information? Then it will automatically route to the S extension. And so the question would be, when would a call ever not have that information? And the answer is when you're using an analog line. So when you're using a historical analog line, if you think about like the phone line at your house, when you get a call to the phone, the analog hard POTS line at your house, you don't get like extension 100 or 101 or 201. Your phone just rings. You just get a call, right? So imagine if you took that phone off of that line and plugged that line into Asterisk. That call would come into Asterisk from the telco. Use them for faxing is a great use. A lot of times you put in a whole VoIP system, put in an FXO line for your faxing. You're going to be happy you did. An FXS out to the fax machine. That's going to work nicely for you. A lot of times people like it for 911 dialing, those sorts of things. So there are use cases today, but it's rare that you would have inbound calls going to, say, an IVR, right? So that doesn't have to be S. It could be whatever I want, but via convention and history, that's what we've chosen. First thing I do is I answer the channel, OK? The reason I answer the channel is because I want to be able to pass media on that channel. And I can't pass media on that channel unless the channel's answered. Now, I could do early media. So I could use the progress application to tell the line, hey, I'm going to send media to you, but don't answer this channel yet. And so this would kind of be like if you've ever called your buddy's cell phone and it says, please hold while your party is reached. And then it plays you Kid Rock or something like that. That's early media. So, or I guess these days it would be like Macklemore or something like that. Then that's early media. And in this case, I'm just answering the channel. Now note, when that channel's answered, that is the moment at which the CDR record will start the billing timer, right? So if you're doing billing based on your call detail records, CDRs are call detail records, when you answer a channel, you're now billing for that call. So keep in mind that we're keeping track. I say we're now billing for that call. There's nothing in Asterisk that Asterisk doesn't put out a bill, right? What I'm saying is Asterisk creates a record, and then when you read those records, you put out the bill, right? In any case, you might want to be cognizant of that. If somebody dials into your system, they haven't gotten to anybody yet. This would be a reason to do early media or something so you don't bill them, or to basically put in provisions there. That's kind of a tangent. Next up, I've got a priority label here called menu beginning, and I'm using the background application. Background application works very similar to the playback application, where it plays an audio file. And this one's going to play one called main menu. The difference between background and playback is that background plays the audio message, and then it listens for DTMF. And so it's listening for key presses. DTMF is dual tone multi-frequency. It's the buttons you press on your phone, right? And so as soon as it gets an unambiguous match, it will route that call. So for example, let's say I have extension 1 and extension 100. If I just press 1, it's going to wait like 5 seconds to say, did you mean 1 for sure, or did you mean 100? Because it's ambiguous, right? But if I have extension 2 and I don't have anything else that starts with a 2, when I press 2, I go straight there. As a matter of course, it is a best practice to name your your internal extension naming conventions off of high-numbered names. So for example, If you call Digium's main line and you want to dial my extension starts with a 6. It's 6099, right? The reason why you want to use 6 or 7 or an 8 is you want to use those high numbers because that way you're not worried about unambiguous matches in your lower numbers because you want your IVRs options 1, 2, and 3 to route real speedy. Now, you might say, oh, well, what about my IVR menu that has options 6, 7, and 8? And the answer is if your IVR has options 6, 7, and 8, then we will make fun of you. And your customers will leave because there's too many options, right? So keep your IVR simple. And while I'm talking about IVRs, I mean, obviously, we're talking about a voice IVR here, right? We're talking about dialing into a phone and hitting DTMF keys and get it routed. We have all been driven crazy by these things. Why? Because of poor design, right? Because somebody had, for option 1, do this. For option 9, do this. I mean, it's nuts, right? We've seen poor design. It's not that IVRs are bad. IVRs are great. IVRs accomplish a lot of things. They're wonderful. In fact, I remember one time I got put in charge of this stupid sign. So the sign basically had a modem in it, and it was like one of those marquee signs out on the side of the road. And they were like, oh, Billy, you are in charge of the phones. Fix the sign. Just because it had a modem in it or because it had a line, right? So I didn't know first thing about this stupid sign. And I'm like, OK, well, I better call. So I call the number. And I have no idea who to ask or what to talk to get information about this. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to listen to their IVR. And when I get to like their technical support people, I'll just be like, 3 for customer support or whatever, right? So I call the number, and I hear it ring, and then I get a hello. And it's a real person. And I'm like, oh, crap. Hello. And they're like, whoa, what can I help you out with? And I'm like, well, I have this broken sign. And she says, well, who do you want to talk to? And I say, I don't know. I need your customer support department. And she's like, oh, well, I don't know. Who is that? Who can I route your call to? So I had to spend like 30 minutes explaining my problem to this woman who said, I think you need Bob. So then I got over to Bob, and I spent 30 minutes explaining my problem to Bob. And then Bob's like, no, you need Pete. And I think Pete finally helped me out. Point is, that was terrible customer service, and I really, really wish they would have just put in an IVR, right? Would have made my life great. So IVRs are great. I'd go on this way long, far too long of a tangent, just to talk about poor design, how much poor design can impact our customer service, right? And so this is just a break from the technical stuff to say as we're all implementing solutions, there's a lot of cool technical things you can do with Asterisk, but remember who you're doing it for. And especially I want to make the point about WebRTC, because what happens is as we are progressing, this will move onto your website, right? So this is not a very intelligent mode for information. When I dial in, I have to listen to a menu. At best, I can get 3 or 4 menus, and then I have to go to 3 or 4 submenus and 3 or 4 submenus, right? But what if I'm on your web page, right? Let's say I'm browsing your web page. Well, first of all, I'm logged in, so you already know my name. You're already authenticated. I shouldn't have to punch in my 16-digit PIN code, and then when I get to an operator, can you please confirm your 16-digit PIN code, right? I shouldn't need to do that because I've already authenticated to your website, right? So I've already authenticated your website, and I have a session cookie. You already know my browsing history. So you know that I've been browsing for IP phones on the website, right? And you know that I've typed into the search engine that I am looking for information about DPMA, right? All this information we should just know. I'm not saying this is available today from Digium, but I'm just painting the picture for you, right? So the idea is when someone's on your website, you have all of this state, right? So then when they click on the help button, there shouldn't be a big, long menu. You know what should be at the top of the menu? Would you like help with phones? Yes. Click on that. And then it connects you to the agent, right? Then we route the call into Asterisk. Then Asterisk routes the call, and it probably is going to do it through WebRTC or some other mechanism, right? But when Asterisk routes that call, then when the call agent's going to pop up and it's going to say, oh, hello, Mr. Chia. I see that you've already authenticated with us, and I see that you're looking for some. Are you looking for some help with DPMA today? Because you should know all that because those are the pages that have been on the site, right? And that's a very fluid, wonderful customer experience. You get to their answer really, really fast, right? So if you're still doing voice menu, which is not going to go away tomorrow or anytime soon, I'm just painting the picture for what could be with WebRTC, what is coming soon, but we're going to see it's going to be multi-mode for a long time, right? But as you're building your IVRs, you want to think about customer experience. You know, you don't want to have more than 3 or 4 options. You want to keep it short. You want to, in fact, even take another cue from the web, right? So on our website, we check which pages are the most visited, right? Every one of us does this. And the support pages that get hit the most, we put at the front of the, we don't make them do 17 clicks to get to that page, right? Same thing with your IVRs. If you've got like 12 menus in your IVR, and menu number 7 is the one that gets hit all the time, that should be menu number 1, right? You should track those metrics. So all that's some free integration advice for you there. On a long tangent to get around that when you press 1, it's going to route to 1, and when you press 2, it's going to route to 2. And you can see here I'm using the queue application to call 1 for queue for sales and 2 for support. 3 is going to spawn off a company directory. 0 is going to dial the operator. That's always a really nice option. You know, if you guys know Life, he shared a story with me once that he said he designed enough IVRs that had speech recognition on them that if you started cussing at the phone, then he routes to an operator because you know that that customer's really mad, right? So anyway, it's just about good customer service, right? In here, I've included my phones context. So assuming that I have a context that dials all my internal phones, why would I include that context, assuming some people know what a context include is?
So you can just dial the extension.
Exactly. So this is the feature I could have in my menu to say, please enter the extension of the person you'd like to dial at any time. I do that via what we call a context include. And what that does is it takes that other box of extensions and it adds those extensions to this context as well, so they can be reached from here as well. We call that a context include. So at a base level, that's kind of the IVR menu. There are some alternate approaches to IVR. So rather than using the background activity, yeah, you have a question?
On that last slide, what are the I and T standing for?
Oh,
Extensions?
okay. That's an excellent question. I got far off in the weeds here. But what did the I and the T do was the question. And that's a great extension. So I talked about special extensions. I talked about the S special extension. When a call comes in with no DID information, it auto routes to the S extension. What happens if I have options 1, 2, 3, and 0? What happens if I press 5? Well, 5 is not an option. 5 will take you nowhere. It's an invalid extension. The call will automatically route to the I extension, right? What happens if I say, hey, welcome to Digium. Press 1 for sales, 2 for support, 3 for the directory, 0 for an operator. And then I just wait. And I wait 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 forever, and the customer doesn't say anything. What happens? Well, after 10 seconds or so, and it's configurable, after a timeout, I'm going to go to the lowercase t extension, which is the timeout. Now, in starting with 1.8, you could do this with E. So the E special extension is like error, and E will take you, if it's invalid, it'll go to E. If it times out, it'll go to E. So it handles both of those use cases with one special extension, which is kind of nice. I mean, you might want to do something different. If it's invalid, you might want to say, I'm sorry, that's not a valid extension. And if it times out, you might want to say, you know, please try again, or something like that. So you could do it either granularly, or you could do it with one special extension. And that's what those do here. In addition, you see some additional logic here, and I'll get into this in the next session, where I'm routing conditionally based on a variable. And so what this does is, let's compare these two IVRs. So here's an IVR, and what happens if I call in, and I wait 10 seconds, and I don't say anything at all, it's going to route to T, it's going to play back, I'm sorry, and then go back to the menu beginning. At the menu beginning, it's going to say, hey, please enter your options. It's going to wait and time out. What if I just leave the phone off the hook and just walk away? I'm going to be tying up that channel into perpetuality, right? It's never, ever going to hang up on that. And that's also poor IVR design because you're tying up your system resources. Instead, what you want to do is you want to basically say kind of like 3 strikes and you're out. If you go through the menu 3 times and there's nobody really there, it's just like a hung channel or something, then you want to hang up on the IVR and jettison those resources. And that's what this logic is showing here. And I'll talk about more of that in the next session. We'll go through exactly what this syntax is looking like. So before we pop off to a short break here, I'll talk about just some alternate approaches. So rather than using the background application, you could use the read application and a goToIf, And so the read application is very similar, but the difference is it will play an audio file and listen for DTMF, but instead of routing to that DTMF, it will write that DTMF into a variable. So then you can do something with that variable. You can route conditionally on it. It's another approach. Both are equally valid. You could use text-to-speech. Capstrol is an excellent text-to-speech engine. So rather than having recordings, you could have custom recordings. There is Allison Smith, who's the voice of Asterisk, has like a database of names where when you're calling customers and you're doing text-to-speech based on dynamic information that you're pulling from a database or your web database or whatever, your customer client list, that it can read their name and there's a whole list of names that you can purchase. There's all that kind of cool stuff. I saw the LumenVox guys earlier. I think those guys have a booth here. LumenVox, Vestec, those are speech recognition engines. There's a couple other ones. We're running short, so I won't talk a lot about speech rec. Basically, my advice on speech rec, you want to say yes and no. You do not want to do speech rec on get me to a dialed operator for my special fancy thing. If you're trying to speech rec on that, it's not going to work on someone's mobile phone. So that's my short on that. Do we have any questions, any other questions on IVRs before we pop off to a break?